The blade stopped an inch from my throat, and the entire hall went silent. That is where this story ends. Let me take you back to where it began, 3 days earlier, in a palace built for people who thought I was something to be laughed at. My name is Ethan Cole. I was a corporal in the Earth Defense Corps, assigned to a 6-man honor guard sent to the Vale Dominion as part of the newest, weakest, most laughed-at member of the Galactic Coalition. That member was Earth. We had been let in on a technicality, tolerated rather than welcomed, and every single delegate in that palace knew it. The Vale Court was beautiful in a way that made my skin crawl. Tall white columns stretched up into a ceiling painted with the stars their empire claimed to own. Servants moved like water, silent and practiced. Everything about the place was built to remind visitors that they were standing inside the heart of an old and powerful civilization, and that we were guests only because the rules said they had to let us in. I stood near the back wall with my unit, dressed in the formal gray of the Earth delegation, doing what soldiers do best at events like this. Standing still, saying nothing, watching everything. Around my left wrist was a thin black band, no wider than 2 fingers. It hummed faintly against my skin, a low vibration I had felt every day for the last 4 years. That band was the only reason I was allowed inside that hall at all. Every human on a coalition world wore one. It was not a fashion choice, it was the law. I will explain why in a moment. First, I need to tell you about the princess. She came down the grand staircase like she already owned the room, which, in a sense, she did. Princess Yathiri Vale, 19 years old by her people's calendar, was the only daughter of King Doran Vale, ruler of a species that had spent the last 1,000 years convincing themselves they were the smartest, strongest, and most important beings in the galaxy. She wore silver robes that seemed to move on their own, and her pale eyes swept across the room the way a predator checks a field for anything worth noticing. They landed on me. I do not know why. Maybe it was the uniform. Maybe it was the fact that I was the only person in that hall who was not bowing when she passed. I had been trained not to bow to foreign royalty unless my commanding officer gave the order, and Captain Miles Hardy had given no such order. So I stood straight while a room full of nobles folded themselves in half around me. She stopped in front of me. The whole hall noticed. Conversations died mid-sentence. "You," she said. Her voice was light, almost musical, the kind of voice that made insults sound like compliments if you were not paying attention. "You are one of the humans." "Corporal Ethan Cole, Your Highness," I said. "Earth Defense Corps." "Earth." She said the word like she was tasting something bitter. The little blue rock that begged its way into our coalition. I said nothing. I had been briefed on this exact possibility. De-escalate, always. Earth's entire diplomatic future depended on soldiers like me swallowing insults with a straight face, so that is what I did. She noticed my silence and seemed to enjoy it. She reached out, almost lazily, and tapped 2 fingers against the band on my wrist. "Do you know what this is for?" she asked, loud enough for the nearby nobles to hear. A few of them laughed quietly behind their hands. "It is a leash. Your entire species wears a leash the moment you step off your dying little planet. Did you know that, soldier? Every human who visits a coalition world is bound like an animal, because your own leaders admitted you cannot be trusted to control yourselves. It is a safety measure, Your Highness," I said carefully, "required under the treaty for all member species when visiting worlds with different gravity conditions." "A safety measure," she smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "How generous of you to call your own caller something so polite." Laughter spread through the hall now, soft and cruel, the kind of laughter people use when they know they are safe to be cruel. I kept my eyes forward, and my hands at my sides. Somewhere behind me, I heard Owen Grant, one of my unit, shift his weight, a silent signal that he was ready to step in if I needed him. I gave the smallest shake of my head. Not yet, maybe not ever. Yathiri circled me slowly, the way a merchant inspects livestock before deciding whether it is worth the price. "They tell stories about your kind, you know," she said. "Old stories, from before the coalition understood what humans truly were. Stories about a species that fought itself into extinction twice and somehow crawled back both times. A species so violent that the first explorers who found your world nearly voted to quarantine it forever. She stopped in front of me again. And now look at you, standing here in your little leash, letting a 19-year-old girl laugh at you in front of your entire delegation, and you do not even blink. I serve my mission, Your Highness, I said, not my pride. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes. Maybe surprise, maybe irritation that I had not given her the reaction she wanted. She recovered quickly, tossing her head back with a short laugh that echoed off the marble. How touching, she said. A trained dog who has learned to smile while he is being mocked. Tell me, soldier, have you ever even lifted a blade without that band doing the work for you? Or are you as fragile as the rest of your leashed little species? I felt something tighten in my chest, small and quiet, like a single dropped stitch in a much larger piece of cloth. I did not show it. I had spent 4 years learning not to show it. I have lifted many things, Your Highness, I said evenly. I simply choose not to lift them here. That answer should have ended it. It almost did. Etheri studied me for one more long moment, her pale eyes narrowing slightly, as if she had heard something in my voice she did not quite understand. Then she turned with a swirl of silver robes and walked away, already laughing with one of her attendants, already forgetting me the way royalty forgets anyone who does not matter to them. But I did not forget her. Later that night, back in the small guest quarters assigned to the Earth delegation, Laura Bennett, our lead diplomat, found me standing by the narrow window that looked out over the palace gardens. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who had spent her entire career being underestimated by rooms exactly like the one I had just stood in. You held it together well today, she said. Thank you, ma'am. That is not a compliment, Corporal. That is a warning. She crossed her arms. The princess is testing us. She is testing you specifically. Her father is under pressure from 3 other coalition houses to have Earth's membership revoked before the next council vote. If she can prove, in public, that a human soldier is weak, foolish, or dangerous, it gives her father every excuse he needs. I understand the stakes, ma'am. Do you? She studied me the way Etheri had studied me, though with far less cruelty and far more concern. Because I watched your jaw the entire time she was speaking, Corporal. I know what that band feels like after 4 years. I know what it costs a person to stand still and take it. I did not answer right away. Outside, beyond the garden, twin moons hung low over a horizon that was not my own, over a sky that did not belong to Earth, over a world that had decided, long before I ever arrived, exactly what my species was worth. I can take it, I finally said. That is the job. Laura studied me a moment longer, then nodded slowly, though I could tell she was not entirely convinced. She walked to the small table near the window and poured herself a glass of water from a pitcher the palace staff had left for us, her movements slow and deliberate, the way people move when they are giving themselves time to choose their next words carefully. Do you know why they picked you for this assignment, Corporal? She asked, not turning around. Because I follow orders, ma'am. Partly, she said. Mostly because your file says you have never once, in 4 years of service, lost your temper in front of a foreign delegation. Not during the trade disputes on Corin Station, not during the border incident with the Halvan envoys, not even when a Halvan officer spat at your boots in front of a dozen witnesses. You just stood there, every single time. She turned to face me. Command believes that makes you the safest possible choice to stand next to volatile foreign royalty. I am starting to wonder if it actually makes you the most dangerous one. I do not follow, ma'am. A man who never lets anything through the walls he has built, Laura said quietly, eventually has to find out what happens when those walls are finally tested past their limit. I have seen it happen to good soldiers before. It rarely happens quietly. She set the glass down. I am not telling you to feel more, Corporal. I am telling you to know your own limits before someone else decides to find them for you. I did not have an answer for that. I only nodded, and she seemed to accept the silence as answer enough, gathering her papers and stepping toward the door. "Get some rest if you can," she said, pausing at the threshold. "Tomorrow the ambassadors from 3 other coalition houses arrive to observe the rest of our stay. If Princess Yathiri decided to make a spectacle of you today with nothing at stake, I imagine she will find the temptation even harder to resist with an audience worth impressing." She was right about that too, though neither of us yet understood how right. "Just remember," she said quietly, before she turned to leave, "there is a difference between restraint and a fuse burning down. Make sure you know which one you are standing on." I did not sleep much that night. I kept hearing the princess's voice, kept hearing that word, leash, kept feeling the small vibration of the band against my wrist, steady and constant, a reminder of exactly what I was allowed to be on this world, and exactly what I was not. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself that words from a 19-year-old girl who had never worked a day of hardship in her entire pampered life meant nothing. I almost believed it. Almost. Because somewhere underneath the discipline, underneath 4 years of training myself to swallow insults for the good of a planet that had sent me here to represent it, something had shifted that afternoon in that marble hall. Something small, something quiet, something that would not stay quiet for long. 3 days later, I finally understood why the coalition feared us so much that they invented the band in the first place. It happened during a briefing with Captain Hardy, held in a small side room away from the main palace, where the 6 of us could speak freely without 100 Vale nobles listening in. Hardy was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, who had served on Earth's border patrols during the worst years of the resource wars, back when humanity was still fighting itself, instead of fighting to be respected by anyone else. He had a way of explaining things that made even the ugliest truth sound simple. "You want to know why we wear these," he said, tapping his own wristband. "Then you need to understand what almost happened the first time the coalition found us." He pulled up a display on the small table between us. Old records translated from Val archives, records that most humans back home had never even been shown. 60 years ago, a coalition scout ship had drifted into our solar system on a routine survey mission, expecting to find nothing more than another dead rock circling a minor star. Instead, they found Earth, populated, industrial, and armed. "They almost quarantined us," Hardy said. "Not because we attacked them, we never even saw the ship. They quarantined us because of what our own history told them. 2 world wars in 1 century, weapons that could end a planet twice over, a species that had clawed itself halfway to extinction and then rebuilt from the ashes, twice, without ever giving up." He looked around the table at each of us. "Most species in this galaxy grow up in comfort. Stable gravity, stable climate, no real predators, no real scarcity. They evolve slow and careful, because nothing is chasing them. We did not have that luxury. Earth chased us our entire history. High-gravity zones during our own off-world colonization attempts, brutal winters, brutal wars, brutal everything. By the time the coalition found us, humans were, on average, stronger, faster, and more physically resilient than almost every other member species combined, purely because our own planet had spent 100,000 years trying to kill us and failing." Owen Grant, sitting across the table from me, let out a low whistle. He was younger than the rest of us, barely 2 years into his service, and he still had a habit of asking the questions everyone else in the room was thinking, but had learned to keep to themselves. "So the Vale, the Corin, all of them," Owen said. "They built an entire galactic government around the assumption that we were basically a loaded weapon that might go off at any moment?" "More or less," Hardy said. "And honestly, given our history, I cannot say I blame them entirely. You have to remember, Grant, most of these species never had to fight their own planet just to survive on it. Vale gravity is punishing by their own standards too, which is exactly why their bodies evolved towards speed and agility rather than raw strength, and why their psychic and technological development outpaced almost everyone else's. They spent their evolutionary history solving problems with cleverness because brute force was never a luxury their bodies could afford. We solved ours with both. because Earth never gave us the option to choose only one. So the band, I said slowly, is not really about protecting us from them. No, Hardy said. It is about protecting them from us. On a coalition world, at coalition gravity, an unbanded human is strong enough to seriously hurt beings who evolved without ever needing to be strong at all. The Veil, the Koran, half the species in this coalition, they are fast thinkers, brilliant engineers, gifted with technology and telepathy and things we do not even have words for yet. But physically, most of them are fragile. A single unbanded human, moving carelessly in a crowded room, could accidentally break bones without even meaning to. He tapped the display again. That is why the treaty exists. Every human off-world wears a band that suppresses our strength and speed down to something safe. It is not a punishment. It is the price of admission. And it is also why, if a human is ever caught unbanded on a coalition world outside of a declared emergency, the penalty is severe. Execution, in some jurisdictions. At minimum, a war crimes tribunal and the permanent revocation of Earth's membership. I sat with that for a long moment. Somewhere in the back of my mind, Yathiri's voice echoed again. A leash. She had called it a leash, and I had wanted so badly to correct her, to tell her it was not weakness, it was choice. Now I understood that it was both, and neither, and something far more complicated than either of us had said out loud. So when she mocked me for being slow, I said quietly, she was mocking the only thing standing between us and a war. She was mocking discipline, Hardy said, and discipline, Corporal, is the hardest thing in the galaxy to fake. That girl has never had to control herself in her entire life. Her people do not need to. We do. Every single day. That is not weakness. I need you to understand that in your bones, because tomorrow is going to test it. He was right about that too. The next morning, word spread through the palace that Princess Yathiri had formally challenged a member of the Earth delegation to a ceremonial duel, to be held in the grand courtyard 3 days later, in front of the full royal court, and, more importantly, in front of the 3 visiting coalition houses who were pressuring King Doran to revoke Earth's membership. The Veil called it a demonstration of honor. Everyone else understood it for what it actually was, a public execution of Earth's reputation, staged as a game. Laura Bennett came to find me within the hour, her face tight with barely controlled anger. She named you specifically, she said. Corporal Ethan Cole. She requested you by name. Why me? Because you did not react, Laura said. You are the only human in this entire delegation who has not shown her a flicker of anger, fear, or embarrassment. She thinks that means you are either the weakest of us, too disciplined to matter, or too slow to notice you have been insulted. Either way, she believes beating you in front of her father's court will prove her point better than beating anyone else. And if I refuse? You cannot refuse, Laura said. The challenge was issued formally, under Veil custom, and witnessed by 2 coalition ambassadors. If we decline, it is read as an admission that humans are too fragile or too cowardly to accept a fair contest. Either interpretation ends Earth's membership within the month. She exhaled slowly, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw real worry behind her diplomat's calm. The duel is ceremonial, non-lethal by Veil law, training blades only, blunted, no killing strikes permitted. You will fight her under full Veil gravity, at full Veil gravity settings, which is nearly double what your body is used to feeling, and you will fight her while wearing your band at its maximum allowed setting, meaning I fight at a disadvantage on purpose. Meaning you fight exactly the way the treaty requires, Laura said. Slow, restrained, human by their definition of the word. She met my eyes. She wants to humiliate you in front of the entire coalition, Corporal. And under the current rules, she is very likely to succeed because those rules were written to make sure she could. Captain Hardy had joined us by then, standing near the doorway with his arms folded, listening in silence until Laura finished. There is another option, he said finally. There is not, Laura said sharply, before he could continue. Do not even suggest it, Miles. I am not suggesting anything, Hardy said. I am simply stating that the treaty allows for an emergency exemption in cases of credible threat to a human's life during a sanctioned coalition activity. If the duel escalates beyond ceremonial bounds, Corporal Cole would be within his rights to remove the band without penalty. That exemption has never once been successfully invoked, Laura said. Not in 60 years of coalition membership. Every human who has attempted to claim it has been prosecuted regardless, because no tribunal in this galaxy wants to set the precedent of an unbanded human being declared innocent under any circumstance. It would be legal suicide for Earth's diplomatic standing, and quite possibly literal suicide for the corporal. I am only saying it exists, Hardy said quietly, for whatever that is worth. I listened to the two of them argue in careful, controlled tones, the tones of two people who respected each other too much to raise their voices even when they disagreed completely, and I understood, somewhere underneath the exhaustion of the last 3 days, that neither of them had an answer that would actually protect me in that courtyard. The treaty had never been designed to protect a human soldier. It had been designed to protect everyone else from one. I thought about that for a long time after Laura left. I thought about the story Hardy had told me, about a species that had survived 2 world wars and 100,000 years of a planet trying to kill it, reduced now to a slow, careful shadow of itself for the comfort of people who had never once had to fight for anything. I thought about the word she had used, leash. I did not sleep again that night, but this time it was not anger keeping me awake. It was something closer to clarity. I understood, finally, exactly what was being asked of me. Not to win. Winning under these rules was almost impossible. I was being asked to lose with dignity, to absorb one more public humiliation for the sake of a planet that had sent 6 soldiers and 1 diplomat to prove that we belonged among the stars. I told myself I could do that. I had done it my entire career. I told myself the band was not a leash. It was a promise, a small daily proof that humanity could be trusted with the strength it carried. I told myself all of that, and I believed most of it, right up until the moment 3 days later when Princess Etheri Vale stepped into the courtyard, looked directly at me with that same cruel, confident smile, and said something that had nothing to do with treaties, or politics, or coalition law at all. She said something about my mother. I did not know how she knew. I never found out, not really, whether it was something dug up by a Vale intelligence officer trying to give her an edge, or simply a lucky, cruel guess made by a girl who had learned that cruelty usually finds a way to land somewhere soft. It did not matter how she knew. What mattered was that she said it, loudly, in front of the entire court, in front of Laura Bennett and Captain Hardy and every human who had crossed the stars to prove we deserved a seat at that table. She said it, and she smiled while she said it, and something in me that had been holding perfectly still for 4 long years finally, quietly, stopped holding. The courtyard was enormous, open to a pale violet sky, ringed by tiered marble seating that held every noble house of the Vale Dominion, and, seated in a place of special honor, the ambassadors of 3 other coalition worlds who had come specifically to watch a human fail. King Doran sat at the highest point of the courtyard, his expression unreadable, his hands folded in his lap in a way that told me he had already decided what result he expected. I stood at one end of the sand-covered floor. Etheri stood at the other, dressed now in a fitted training uniform instead of her ceremonial robes, a slim silver blade resting easily in her hand, as if it weighed nothing at all. For her, at Vale's natural gravity, it probably did. My own blade felt heavier than it should have. That was the gravity talking. Vale's pull was nearly double what I had grown up with, and even with my band set to its maximum allowed output, an output the treaty capped specifically so that I would never feel truly comfortable on a world like this one, every movement cost me more effort than it should. My legs felt like they were wading through water. My arms felt slow. This was, I understood now, exactly how the Vale wanted every human to feel on their world. Manageable, unthreatening, small. An official in ceremonial robes stepped between us, and recited the rules in a bored, practiced tone. Blunted training blades only. No strikes to the head or throat. First to yield, or first to be disarmed and held at the opponent's blade for a count of 3, would be declared the winner. It was meant to sound civilized. Everyone in that courtyard understood it was meant to be a public shaming, dressed up in the language of sport. Yathiri smiled at me across the sand. "Try not to fall down too quickly, soldier," she said, just loud enough for the front rows to hear. Soft laughter rippled through the seats. I did not answer her. I was thinking about my mother, about the words Yathiri had used a few minutes earlier, back at the edge of the courtyard, when she had leaned close and said something about weak little human families and how easily they broke, something so specific and so cruel that I still do not fully understand, to this day, how a girl who had never once left her palace could have known enough about my life to aim so precisely. The official gave the signal. The duel began. Exactly as everyone expected, I was slow, painfully, visibly slow. Yathiri moved like water, finding the fastest path downhill, her blade flashing in quick, elegant strokes that I barely managed to deflect. In her own gravity, at her own natural speed, she was faster than almost anything I had ever trained against back on Earth. I staggered under the weight of my own limbs, my band humming loudly against my wrist, as it worked to keep my strength suppressed to treaty limits, even as my body strained against the unfamiliar gravity trying to drag me down. The crowd loved it. I could hear them, the soft murmurs of satisfaction, the quiet laughter that grew louder every time Yathiri's blade tapped harmlessly off my shoulder or forced me to stumble backward across the sand. She was not even trying particularly hard. She was performing, playing to the tiered seats around her, adding little flourishes to each strike, spinning unnecessarily, letting her blade whistle through the air in showy arcs that had nothing to do with actual skill, and everything to do with making sure every noble in that courtyard understood exactly how far beneath her I was supposed to be. I tried, early on, to find some kind of rhythm I could work with. Back on Earth, I had trained for years in close combat, had sparred against soldiers twice my size, had learned to read an opponent's shoulders and hips before their blade ever moved. None of that training had prepared me for fighting inside a body that felt like it was wrapped in wet sand, every motion arriving a full half-second slower than my mind commanded it to. I watched Yathiri's shoulder dip before a strike, understood exactly where the blade was going, and still could not move fast enough to do more than absorb the hit at an angle that kept it from landing solidly. "You see it coming," she said, almost thoughtfully, circling me again. "I can tell. Your eyes are not slow at all. It is only the rest of you." She struck again, low this time, forcing me to drop my guard awkwardly to block it. "That must be the cruelest part of your little leash, soldier, knowing exactly what you should do, and never being fast enough to do it." She was not entirely wrong, and that was what made the word sting. I could see every opening. I understood, with perfect clarity, exactly where I would need to strike if I wanted to end the exchange in half the time it was actually taking me. The knowledge did nothing but sharpen the humiliation of a body that would not obey it. "Is this really the best your species has?" she called out, circling me lazily while I tried to catch my breath in the crushing gravity. "I was told humans were dangerous. I was told you were the species that frightened half the coalition into nearly quarantining your entire planet." She struck again, and again I barely deflected it, my whole arm aching from the effort of moving fast enough. "And yet here you stand, slower than my own tutors, weaker than my own guards, wrapped up in your little leash like a dog that has finally learned its place." I said nothing. I kept my guard up. I kept my breathing steady, the way Hardy had taught me, the way 4 years of discipline had trained into my bones. Somewhere in the stands, I could see Laura Bennett's face, tight and pale, and Captain Hardy beside her, his jaw locked, his hands gripping the railing in front of him so hard his knuckles had gone white. Yathiri pressed her advantage, driving me back across the sand with a series of quick strikes, each one a little harder than the last, each one landing a little closer to skin than the rules technically allowed. The official watching the match said nothing. I understood, in that moment, that the rules only ever really applied to me. "Your mother," Yathiri said suddenly, low enough that only I could hear it over the ringing clash of our blades, "must be very proud, watching her son get beaten by a girl half his age in front of the entire galaxy." Her blade caught mine and slid free, forcing me to twist awkwardly to avoid losing my footing entirely. Or perhaps she is not watching at all. Perhaps that is simply what happens to weak little human families. They fall apart, quietly, the same way you are about to. I do not know, even now, exactly what she meant by that, whether it was a lucky guess or something crueler and more deliberate. It did not matter. The words landed exactly where she intended them to land, in the one place 4 years of military discipline had never fully managed to protect. For a moment, everything went very quiet inside my head. Not loud, not angry exactly. Quiet and clear, the way a room feels the instant before a decision is made. I thought about the band on my wrist. I thought about everything Hardy had told me, about restraint being the hardest thing to fake, about discipline being the real measure of strength. I thought about Laura's warning, about the difference between restraint and a fuse burning down. And then I thought, very simply, that I was tired of being laughed at for the crime of choosing not to hurt anyone. I did not lunge at her. I did not raise my voice. I reached up, slowly, deliberately, in full view of the entire royal court, and unclasped the band from my wrist. The humming stopped. For half a second, nothing happened. Yathiri, mid-swing, did not even seem to notice, too caught up in her own momentum, too confident in a fight she believed she had already won. She brought her blade around in another one of her showy arcs, aimed at my shoulder, exactly the same strike she had landed a dozen times already. This time, my hand came up and caught her wrist before the blade ever reached me. I did not grip hard. I did not need to. The moment my fingers closed around her wrist, even gently, I felt her entire body go rigid with shock, because she understood, in that single instant, exactly what she was feeling. Not the slow, careful resistance of a banded human moving through crushing gravity. Something else entirely. Something that did not strain, did not stagger, did not struggle at all. The courtyard went silent, so completely that I could hear the wind moving through the tiered seats above us. I let go of her wrist immediately, stepping back, giving her space, my empty hand raised in a gesture I hoped translated across species as clearly as it did on Earth. "I mean you no harm. I am simply, for the first time since I arrived on this world, standing here as I actually am." Yathiri stared at me. Her blade lowered, slowly, uncertainly. Around us, I could hear the murmur of the crowd shift from amused laughter to something colder, sharper, edged with a fear that had not been in that courtyard a moment before. "What?" she said quietly, her voice no longer carrying the easy confidence of a moment ago. "Did you just do?" "I took off my leash," I said. I did not move toward her. I want to be clear about that, because it matters more than almost anything else in this story. I did not attack her. I did not raise my blade. I simply stood there, unbanded, at full veil gravity, and let her see, for the first time, what the treaty had actually been protecting her from every single day since I had arrived on her world. She recovered quickly. I will give her that. Whatever fear had flickered across her face a moment before hardened back into something closer to fury. The fury of someone who had just been shown, in front of her entire court, that the game she thought she controlled had never truly been hers to control at all. "Guards," she called out, her voice sharp. "He has broken treaty law." But even as the words left her mouth, I saw the hesitation ripple through the armed soldiers stationed around the courtyard's edge, saw them glance up toward King Doran, waiting for a signal he had not yet given. Because everyone in that courtyard, every noble, every ambassador, every soldier, understood exactly the same thing in that moment. An unbanded human, standing perfectly still, offering no violence, asking for nothing, was far more terrifying than anything they had imagined when they wrote that treaty in the first place. Not because of what I might do, because of what I was clearly, deliberately, choosing not to do. Yathiri raised her blade again, her jaw tight, her pride refusing to let the duel end on anything but her own terms. "Finish it then," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "If you are truly so powerful, unleashed soldier, then prove it. Finish the duel." I looked at her for a long moment, at the girl who had spent 3 days mocking a species she had never once tried to understand, who had reached, without hesitation, for the one wound she thought might break me in front of her entire court. And then I stepped forward, not to strike her, but to end the duel the only way that would actually mean something. She swung at me, one final time, a genuine strike now, no more showmanship, driven by something closer to desperation than confidence. I let it come. At the very last instant I moved, not with violence, but with a control so absolute it looked, to every witness in that courtyard, like time itself had slowed down around me. I caught her blade against mine, turned it aside with barely any force at all, and let her own momentum carry her forward, off balance, her own weapon curving back toward her, stopping an inch from her throat, held there not by my strength, but by the simple, undeniable fact that I chose to stop it exactly there and nowhere further. The blade hovered, motionless, an inch from her skin, and the entire hall went silent. That silence stretched for what felt like a very long time, though I doubt it was more than a few seconds. In that stretch of quiet, I understood exactly how much danger I was standing in, and exactly why. Every soldier stationed around the courtyard's edge had their weapons raised now, pointed at me, waiting for a single word from their king. I could see Laura Bennett half rising from her seat in the stands, her hand pressed flat against the railing, her face drained of color. I could see Captain Hardy beside her, utterly still, the way a man goes still when he knows that any sudden movement from him might be the thing that gets someone killed. I held Yathiri's blade exactly where it was, an inch from her throat, close enough that she must have felt the cool metal edge against her skin, and I did not move it any closer. Then, very slowly, I released it. I let go of her wrist entirely. I stepped back, one full pace, then another, putting clear distance between us, my hands open and empty at my sides, where every soldier in that courtyard could see them. Yathiri stood frozen where I had left her, her own blade still trembling faintly in her hand, her breath coming fast and shallow. I reached down, unhurried, and picked up the band from where it had fallen in the sand beside me. I clasped it back around my wrist without a word. The moment it locked into place, I felt the familiar hum return, felt the strange heavy pull of Vale's gravity settle back over my limbs, felt my body return to the slow, careful weight that had made me an object of laughter 3 days earlier. I dropped my blunted training blade onto the sand. Then I lowered myself to one knee, in full view of King Doran's entire court, and bowed my head. I want to explain why I did that, because I think it matters more than anything else I did that day. I did not kneel because I was afraid, although I was. I did not kneel because I believed I had done something wrong, although under the letter of the treaty I had. I knelt because I understood, in that single quiet moment, that the only way to prove what I needed to prove was to show every person in that courtyard, without a single word of explanation, that removing the band had never been about power at all. It had been a choice, and I was choosing, now, just as deliberately, to put that power away again. "Corporal Cole," came a voice from above, deep and steady, cutting through the tense silence like a blade of its own. King Doran had risen from his seat. Every eye in the courtyard turned toward him. I did not raise my head. "Your Majesty, you have broken treaty law," the king said. "You are aware of the penalty." "I am aware, Your Majesty." "And yet you removed the band willingly, in front of witnesses, during a sanctioned duel with my daughter." His voice was impossible to read, flat and careful, the voice of a man who had not yet decided which way this moment would fall. "Explain yourself." I lifted my head then, though I remained kneeling. Across the courtyard, I could see Yathiri watching me, her blade lowered now, her expression somewhere between fury and something else I could not yet name. "Your daughter asked me a question during the duel, Your Majesty," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. "She asked whether I had ever lifted a blade without my band doing the work for me. She suggested that everything gentle about my people was simply proof of weakness, that our restraint was nothing more than a leash forced upon an animal that could not be trusted." I paused. I removed the band to answer her question honestly, not to attack her, not to threaten this court. I never raised my blade against her with intent to harm. I disarmed her, and I stopped, because stopping was always the only outcome I intended. "You could have killed her," the king said. "Any observer in this courtyard could see that clearly enough. Nothing stopped you except your own will." "Yes, Your Majesty." I did not look away from him. "That is precisely my point." A long silence followed. I could feel the weight of every eye in that courtyard, ambassadors from 3 coalition houses, dozens of Vale nobles, my own delegation frozen in the stands, all waiting to see which way the king's judgment would fall. It was Yathiri who spoke first. "Father," she said, and her voice, for the first time since I had met her, carried none of its usual cold confidence. "May I speak?" The king inclined his head slightly, granting permission, though his eyes never left me. Yathiri turned to face me fully. Up close, I could see now what the crowd's distance had hidden, the faint tremor still running through her hands, the pale, shaken look of someone who had just understood something about the universe that no lesson, no tutor, no lifetime of privilege had ever prepared her to understand. "Why did you stop?" she asked, and the question was quiet, almost lost beneath the wind moving through the courtyard. "You had every reason not to. I mocked you. I insulted your species, your family, your mother, in front of my entire court, publicly, deliberately, to break you. You had the power to end this duel however you wished, and every witness here would have called it justified under the terms I set myself." Her voice caught slightly. "Why did you stop?" I thought about how to answer that honestly, because I understood, even kneeling there in the sand, with soldiers' weapons still trained on me, that this question mattered more than anything the king might decide about treaty law. "Because being strong was never the hard part, Your Highness," I said. "Any creature in this galaxy can be strong if the universe hands it the right body, the right gravity, the right history. Strength is not a virtue, it is an accident of circumstance." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. Choosing what to do with that strength, that is the only part that has ever actually mattered. My people did not survive our own history by being the strongest species in the galaxy. We survived it by learning, generation after generation, painfully, how to control what we had become. That control is not weakness. It is the only reason any of us are still alive to stand in front of you today. Yathiri stared at me for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, slowly, like ice beginning to crack beneath the surface of still water. "I called you a leashed dog," she said quietly. "You did. I was wrong. I did not answer that immediately. I was not certain in that moment whether an apology from a princess of the Vale Dominion, spoken in front of her entire court, was meant for me to hear, or simply for her to say out loud so that she could believe it herself. King Doran descended the steps from his seat slowly, crossing the courtyard floor toward us both. The soldiers around the edges finally lowered their weapons at a small gesture from him, and I felt the tension in the air ease, just slightly, though it did not disappear entirely. "Corporal Cole," the king said, stopping a few paces away. "Stand." I rose to my feet, still favoring the ache in my legs from the crushing gravity, still aware of every eye watching me. "You broke the letter of our treaty," the king said. "That fact does not change. Under strict interpretation, I would be within my rights to have you tried before a coalition tribunal." He paused, studying me with an expression I could not quite place, something between calculation and, unexpectedly, respect. "And yet," he glanced toward his daughter, then back toward me, "you had, by every account in this courtyard, complete and total opportunity to cause serious harm, or worse, to my daughter, to my soldiers, to anyone within reach, and you chose, deliberately and immediately, to do nothing but demonstrate restraint. You put the band back on yourself. No one forced you. You knelt of your own will." He shook his head slowly. "I have spent 60 years being told that your species is dangerous because of what you are capable of. I did not understand, until this afternoon, that the far more important question was never what you are capable of. It was what we choose, Your Majesty," I said quietly. "Yes," the king said, "that." He turned to address the full courtyard then, his voice rising to carry across the tiered seats, across the watching ambassadors from 3 coalition houses who had come specifically hoping to witness Earth's humiliation. "Let it be recorded," King Doran said, "that on this day, a human soldier demonstrated, before this entire court, that his species' discipline is not born from fear of punishment, nor from any inability to do otherwise. It is a choice, renewed every single day, by every human who wears that band willingly." He looked back at me one final time. "I will not be recommending Earth's membership for revocation. I will in fact be recommending the opposite." A murmur swept through the stands, disbelief and surprise mixing together in equal measure. Somewhere among the tiered seats, one of the visiting ambassadors, a tall, thin representative of the Coran trade houses who had spent most of the week openly skeptical of Earth's presence in the coalition, rose slowly to his feet and inclined his head toward me, a formal gesture of respect I had not expected from a species that rarely offered it to outsiders. I did not know what to do with that, so I simply returned the gesture as best I understood how, and sat back down feeling strangely unsteady, as though the ground itself had shifted slightly beneath everything I had believed about how this day was supposed to end. I caught Laura Bennett's eye across the courtyard, saw the tears she was fighting not to let fall, saw Captain Hardy's shoulders finally loosen after minutes of held tension. Yathiri remained standing in front of me as the courtyard slowly began to stir back to life around us, nobles murmuring, ambassadors already whispering urgently among themselves, servants moving to attend to whatever came next in the day's formal proceedings. She did not join the murmuring crowd. She simply stood there, watching me, with an expression I had not seen on her face once in the 3 days I had known her. It looked, more than anything else, like curiosity. "I would like to speak with you again," she said quietly, so that only I could hear it, properly, not like this, not in front of a crowd. I studied her for a moment, this 19-year-old girl who had spent 3 days trying to break me in front of her entire kingdom, who had, in the space of a single afternoon, been forced to unlearn something she had believed her entire life. "I would like that too, Your Highness," I said. And for the first time since I had arrived on Vale, she did not smile the cruel smile she had worn every time I had seen her before. It was something smaller, quieter, and far more honest. News of what happened in that courtyard did not stay within the palace walls for long. By the following morning, every coalition house with a representative on Vale had heard some version of the story, and by the end of the week, versions of it had reached at least a dozen other member worlds, each retelling shifting slightly, growing slightly, the way stories do when they travel faster than the people who lived them. I did not enjoy the attention. I want to be honest about that. For 4 years, my entire training had been built around the idea of staying quiet, staying disciplined, letting Earth's actions speak louder than any individual soldier ever could. Suddenly, ambassadors I had never met were requesting meetings with me directly. Nobles who had laughed at me 3 days earlier now bowed when I passed them in the palace halls, a change so abrupt it felt almost dishonest, as though the respect had less to do with who I actually was and more to do with what they now understood I was capable of choosing not to do. Captain Hardy found me on the second evening after the duel, standing on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens, watching the twin moons rise over a sky that still did not feel like home. "You handled that better than most veterans I have served with," he said, leaning against the railing beside me. "I nearly did not handle it at all," I admitted. "If she had not said what she said about my mother, I do not know that I would have reached for the band." "Maybe," Hardy said, "or maybe you would have found another reason eventually. Some things build slowly, Corporal, until they don't." He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the gardens. Laura tells me the Coalition Council is reconvening the membership vote early. King Doran's endorsement changed the calculation for at least 2 of the other houses. We may actually walk away from this posting with Earth's position stronger than when we arrived. That was never really the plan, I said. I was supposed to lose quietly. Plans change, Hardy said, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something close to a smile cross his weathered face. Sometimes for the better. 3 days later, I received a private message requesting my presence in one of the smaller garden courtyards, away from the formal halls of the palace, away from ambassadors and nobles and anyone who might be watching. The message was signed simply, Yathiri. I found her sitting on a low stone bench beneath a tree with silver-colored leaves, dressed not in the elaborate robes of a princess but in something simpler, plainer, the kind of clothing that suggested she had chosen it specifically to avoid drawing attention. She looked younger like this, less like the girl who had mocked me in front of an entire court, and more like what she actually was, a 19-year-old who had grown up inside a bubble of privilege so complete she had never once had to question anything about the world she had been born into, until 3 days ago. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to the empty space on the bench beside her. I sat, keeping a respectful distance. "You wanted to talk," I said. "I have been trying to understand something," she said, staring out at the garden rather than looking at me directly. "My entire life, I was taught that strength was the only thing that mattered, that the measure of a person, or a species, was how much power they held, how much force they could bring to bear when it mattered. My father built an empire on that idea. My tutors reinforced it. Every noble in that court reinforces it every single day, simply by existing inside a system built entirely around who holds the most power over whom." She finally looked at me, and then a human soldier, wearing a device specifically designed to make him weaker than everyone around him, showed me something I had never once considered in 19 years of study. "What was that?" I asked. "That restraint, real restraint, chosen restraint, is a far rarer and far more difficult thing than raw strength will ever be," she said. "Any creature born strong is simply born strong. It costs them nothing. But you, and your entire species apparently, choose to be gentle every single day, in a galaxy that has never once been gentle with you. You choose it even when no one is watching. You choose it even when someone like me stands in front of you, deliberately trying to provoke you into doing otherwise." She shook her head slowly. "I do not think I understood, until I felt your hand around my wrist, exactly how much control that must require. I have never had to control anything in my entire life. Nothing has ever asked it of me." I thought about how to respond to that, aware that whatever I said next would likely stay with her far longer than anything I could say to a room full of diplomats. "My people did not choose this path because it was easy, Your Highness," I said. "We chose it because the alternative nearly destroyed us, more than once. Every human who wears that band understands, on some level, exactly what we would be capable of without it, and that knowledge is not comfortable. It would be far simpler in some ways to simply be strong and let that strength speak for itself. But simple is not the same as right." I paused. "You mocked me for wearing a leash. I understand now why you saw it that way. But a leash is something placed on a creature from the outside, something it has no say in. What I wear is something closer to a promise. I put it on myself, every morning, and I could remove it whenever I chose. The fact that I choose not to, day after day, is the entire point." Yathiri was quiet for a long moment, watching the twin moons begin their slow climb above the garden wall. "I owe your delegation a formal apology," she said eventually. "I have already spoken with my father about it. I intend to deliver it publicly, before the full court, before the coalition ambassadors depart." "That is not necessary, Your Highness." "It is," she said firmly. "Not for your sake, Corporal Cole, though I do owe you that as well. For my own. I nearly cost my father's kingdom a valuable alliance, and I nearly proved myself exactly as cruel and thoughtless as every old story about spoiled royalty suggests. simply because I could not imagine that a species I had been taught to look down upon might have something to teach me. I would rather be the kind of ruler who learns that lesson at 19 than the kind who never learns it at all. I found myself, unexpectedly, respecting her for that admission. It could not have been easy, for someone raised the way she had been raised, to say those words out loud to the very person she had wronged. For what it is worth, I said, most people, human or otherwise, go their entire lives without ever questioning the things they were taught before they were old enough to know better. The fact that you are questioning it now says more about your character than the mistake ever did. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Owen Grant found me the night before the apology was scheduled, sitting alone in the small courtyard outside the delegation's quarters, turning the gravity band slowly between my fingers before clasping it back onto my wrist for the night. Word around the palace is that half the noble houses want to offer you a formal title, he said, dropping onto the bench beside me. Something about honorary recognition for demonstrating exceptional restraint under provocation. Laura is drafting the polite refusal already. I do not want a title, I said. I figured. Owen was quiet for a moment, looking up at the unfamiliar stars. Can I ask you something, Cole? When you had that blade an inch from her throat, and the whole world was watching to see what you would do, were you scared? I thought about the question honestly before answering it. I was more scared in the 2 seconds after I stopped than in any moment before it, I admitted. Stopping was easy, in a strange way. I had already decided, long before that duel started, exactly what kind of person I wanted to be if that moment ever came. The fear came after, waiting to see whether the rest of the galaxy would believe me. They believed you, Owen said. I do not think anyone in that courtyard will forget what they saw. No, I agreed quietly. I do not think they will. The formal apology happened 2 days later, exactly as she promised, delivered before the full court, with a steadiness that surprised even her own father, from what I later heard through Laura Bennett. The coalition ambassadors who had come to Vale hoping to witness Earth's humiliation returned to their own worlds instead, with reports of quiet, controlled strength, of a species that had earned its place among the stars not through conquest, but through discipline forged in hardship most of the galaxy had never had to endure. The membership vote, when it finally came, was not close. Earth's position in the coalition was confirmed, and for the first time since our small blue planet had been discovered by a scout ship 60 years earlier, no one on that council seriously entertained the idea of quarantine, revocation, or exile. I stayed on Vale for another 2 weeks before our delegation was recalled home. In that time, Yathiri and I spoke several more times, always in that same quiet garden, always without the weight of formal titles between us. I would not call what grew there anything as simple as friendship, not yet, not after everything that had passed between us in that courtyard, but it was something, a bridge built slowly and carefully between two people who had started as enemies and ended somewhere far more complicated and far more honest. On my last night on Vale, I stood once more on that same balcony where Hardy had found me days earlier, looking out at a sky full of unfamiliar stars, my gravity band humming its familiar steady hum against my wrist. Somewhere among those distant points of light was a small blue planet that had spent its entire history fighting simply to survive, and had somehow, against every expectation the galaxy held for it, learned along the way how to be gentle. I thought about Yathiri's question in that courtyard, the one that had started everything. Why did you stop? I had given her an honest answer that day, but the truest answer, the one I did not say out loud, was simpler than anything I had told her. I stopped because stopping was the whole point of who we were trying to be. Somewhere below me, in the palace archives, a record now existed of the day a human soldier removed his band in front of an entire royal court and chose, of his own free will, not to use the strength that choice revealed. I did not know, standing there that night, that the story would eventually travel far beyond Vale, retold in council chambers and academy lecture halls across a dozen coalition worlds, remembered not as a tale of a weapon unleashed, but as a lesson in what real strength actually looked like. I only knew, in that quiet moment, that I would put the band back on again the next morning, and the morning after that, and every morning for as long as I served among the stars. Not because I had to, because I chose to. And that choice, more than anything else that had happened in that courtyard, was the truest thing about being human that I had ever managed to show anyone. When our transport finally lifted off from the Vale capital 2 weeks later, I stood near the small viewport in the passenger hold, watching the palace shrink beneath the clouds until it disappeared entirely into the curve of the planet. Laura Bennett settled into the seat beside me, a data pad full of updated diplomatic briefings resting unread in her lap. "You know," she said, "when this posting began, I genuinely believed we would be lucky to walk away from Vale with our membership intact at all. I did not imagine we would leave with an ally instead." "Neither did I admitted. "For what it is worth, Corporal," she said, "I was wrong about something too. I told you once there was a difference between restraint and a fuse burning down, and I worried, that first night, that you were closer to the second than you realized." She shook her head slightly. "I understand now that I misjudged what I was watching. You were never a fuse at all. You were simply waiting for a moment that actually mattered enough to spend yourself on." I did not have a ready answer for that, so I only nodded, watching the stars begin to fill the viewport as the last traces of Vale's atmosphere fell away behind us. Somewhere back on that planet, in a small garden courtyard beneath a tree with silver leaves, a princess who had once mocked me for wearing a leash was, I hoped, beginning to understand something about her own galaxy that no lesson before that day had ever managed to teach her. And somewhere ahead of me, past the stars filling that viewport, a small blue planet was waiting to hear the story of what one of its soldiers had done, not with strength, but with the choice to set it aside. I reached up, out of habit, and touched the band still resting quietly against my wrist. It hummed there, faint and steady, exactly as it always had. I did not take it off again for the rest of the journey home. I did not need to. Everyone who mattered had already seen what it meant that I could.